Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on forest carbon, AMC's Maine woods, and net zero with AMC's Cathy, Poppenwimer, and Dave Publicover. My name is Allie Burdick, and I'm the Assistant Director of President's Society. On behalf of all of us at AMC, I want to thank you all for being here today. We hope that you had a warm and safe winter and a wonderful spring equinox. I also hope you have plans to get outdoors this spring, whether you've got snow again on the ground or sunshine. Hopefully you've got something fun planned for outdoors. Before I introduce our presenters for today, I want to thank you all for joining us. As members and supporters of AMC, you make the trail work, advocacy, outdoor education, and research, all of AMC's extensive scope of work for the outdoors possible. Thank you for being a steward of the outdoors and our shared recreational experience. So, as for today's presentation, we're so glad you could tune in to learn more about the impact of StoryMaps and how this tool helps organizations like AMC share information with the public. In addition, Dave will also share the value and current status of New England forests as a natural climate solution and how carbon-friendly forest management can enhance carbon storage in forests while providing a sustainable flow of timber products. Our presentation will be about 35 minutes with time for questions at the end. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and pose questions at any point during the webinar. We will take the time to answer those questions at the end, but if there are any clarifying questions while Dave and Cathy are presenting, we may be able to pose those. Following the webinar, we'll also send you an email with the link to the recording and the links to all the story maps that you'll learn about today. And if you find today's presentation interesting, we invite you to pass it along. I'm sure there may be friends, family members, or colleagues who would also enjoy the topic, and we'd welcome them to learn more. So I'm now pleased to introduce our panelists, Cathy Poppenwimer and Dave Publicover, for today's presentation. Cathy is AMC's GIS scientist and is based out of Pinkham Notch, New Hampshire. In addition to her work on StoryMaps, Cathy works on land and trail assessments in the Pennsylvania Highland regions, stream models in the Maine Woods Initiative, or MWI. She supports other scientists with GIS analysis when needed, and she is the AMC's GIS administrator. Cathy has also supported our chapters with their GIS needs. When Cathy isn't working on her many responsibilities at AMC, she enjoys volunteering at her local food pantry, reading, and traveling. Today, I also have the pleasure of introducing Dave Publicover. Dave retired from AMC at the end of 2023 after serving as senior staff scientist and assistant research director. During his more than 30 years at AMC, he worked on a wide range of issues related to regional land conservation, sustainable forestry, and renewable energy policy. Dave oversaw forest management planning and carbon project development on AMC's Maine Woods Initiative lands. Dave has been critical to AMC, the research department, and the Maine Woods Initiative. In recognition of his work and dedication, Dave received several awards for his work, including the George and Laura Appel Award and the AMC Andy Fallender Prize. Throughout his career, Dave contributed to AMC's organizational mission in the areas of the Maine Woods Initiative, forest management, regional energy development, White Mountain National Forest Management Review, and organizational environmental sustainability. During his retirement, Dave enjoys attending live music concerts, mostly which are bluegrass, and he also enjoys ignoring what day of the week it is. Thank you both for joining us, Dave and Cathy, and welcome.
All right, so taking it away, thank you for joining us. This is actually going to be kind of a 2-for-1 presentation. Initially, Cathy is going to talk about how AMC has adopted StoryMaps as a new way of sharing information on a lot of our work. I tend to think of StoryMaps as combining the best aspects of a PowerPoint presentation and a narrative article. So they allow you to integrate, text, video, images, and even interactive maps. And we've used, Cathy has been our guru on StoryMaps, and she's going to describe a number of the ways that they've been used. And then I'm going to come back and talk about in a little more detail about one specific story map that we completed last fall, focusing on AMC's Maine woods. So I'm going to pass it on to Cathy now, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks, Dave. So in the last 4 years, the AMC has developed a number of story maps, which range from bringing attention to community science projects, such as iNaturalist, to promoting close-to-home trail projects in New England, like the Bay Circuit Trail and Greenway. While we have over 20 published story maps, today I'm just going to highlight 3. I do want to mention that all these story maps are group efforts. My involvement is to assist in developing the layout, creating maps, finding photos, and setting up the overall story map project. To bring these story maps to fruition sometimes requires a large number of staff and volunteers. They are no small task to complete. In February of 2022, we published Expanding Access to the Outdoors in New England. This story map focuses on access to open space and trails for environmental justice communities. This story map serves as an information resource to identify gaps and disparities in outdoor access, spur community discussions, and bring together stakeholders in planning for a more equitable future. The content of this story map was developed by the AMC Senior Staff Scientist, Georgia Murray. This story map focuses on a case study. Thank you. Case study in Springfield, Mass, which demonstrates the importance of learning and planning, which was conducted by 4 undergraduate college students from UMass Amherst. The next story map is the Merrimack Dragonfly Mercury Project, which was published in April of 2022. This story map focuses on implementing the Dragonfly Mercury Project into the Merrimack River watershed near Lowell and Lawrence, Massachusetts. The Dragonfly Mercury Project is a nationwide study that works with citizen scientists and community volunteers to collect dragonfly larvae for mercury analysis. AMC Research Director Dr. Sarah Nelson has been working with local school groups and Lowell area city and national parks to collect the dragonfly larvae. This story map provides valuable information about the project for educators and community leaders to better understand why this is being done and fight mercury contamination. To reach as many educators, community, and family members in Lowell and Lawrence as we can, this story map was translated into 3 other languages: Spanish, Portuguese, and Khmer. This was done due to the fact that Lowell and Lawrence are immigrant cities and textbook environmental justice communities. 82% of residents are people of color, with over 40% foreign-born. English is a second language in 76% of Lawrence households. The last story map I would like to share is the Pennsylvania Highlands Conservation Atlas, which was published in April of 2023. This resource update was created from information provided in the 2006 paper Conservation Atlas. This story map builds awareness about the importance of the Pennsylvania Highlands region, as well as its resources and conservation and recreation needs. It has been shared with partner organizations, municipalities, and counties in the area. Currently, it is displayed on a number of our conservation partners' websites. Within the Highlands, 11 conservation areas were identified as key landscapes that provide opportunities for biodiversity while contributing to the Highlands' overall ecological richness. Each conservation area has its own story map. It identifies the most important natural, historical, and cultural resources in its area, as well as a call for action to help protect this incredible and threatened region. Well, I just touched on 3 different story maps. They all use a similar format to share important information. AMC has utilized StoryMaps for 10 different projects, with the earliest published in 2020. StoryMaps such as these are a powerful tool for AMC to share information in an understandable way, while also making the content engaging and informative. Back to you, Dave.
All right, thanks, Cathy. So I'm going to be talking about one specific story map we did and highlighting a lot of the work we've been doing at the Maine Woods Initiative to restore some of these formerly heavily harvested industrial forest lands to a more natural ecological condition, which with both climate change and biodiversity benefits. And this story map can be found on through AMC's website, outdoors.org. If you go under the conservation link to the Maine Woods Initiative page, and if you scroll down a little bit, so next slide, Allie, to the place where it says underneath responsible forestry, there's a link to carbon sequestration. And if you click on that, it will take you to the story map. So now, Allie, if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll start sharing mine. Okay. Share screen. All right. So this is the landing page of the story map. Now, I will warn you that story maps are not really designed to be a visual aid for a presentation such as this, unlike a PowerPoint presentation where every slide has a purpose. You click to a slide, you talk about it, then you click to the next one. This is more or less a continuous presentation. So I'm going to be scrolling past a lot of stuff. And you may be wondering, oh, what was that? That looks interesting. Well, it's just going to have to whet your appetite to go read the full thing. You'll have to think of this more as the Cliff Notes or the movie trailer version. But it will give you enough information about what we're doing that hopefully you want to go learn the rest of the detail. Now, one of the nice things about story maps is it can be divided into sections or chapters, as you can see down on the bottom. And this one has 4 basic chapters. Forest carbon background, which basically talks about how forests work as natural climate solutions, sort of natural environments that can help sequester carbon, take carbon out of the atmosphere. Then a discussion of how forest management can enhance carbon storage in forests. Finally, how these sort of techniques are being applied on AMC's Maine Woods Initiative, and how this relates to AMC's Net Zero Initiative, our attempt to become more ecologically sustainable as an organization. So again, I'm going to be scrolling past lots of stuff and just stopping on a few highlights. Okay. So you may have heard the term natural climate solutions. It's pretty much a buzzword these days, a buzzword these days. In our region, forests are the primary natural carbon solution, but it also includes things like wetlands and agricultural lands that can take carbon out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis and store it as organic matter in either plant matter or decayed organic matter in soils. We can go through the story, kind of the history of forests in the country and New England and how that's affected their carbon status. Okay, scrolling past. We've probably all seen similar graphs like this, which shows the history of forest cover in New England, the clearing for agriculture in the 1800s, and the recovery of the eastern forests as agriculture moved to better lands in the Midwest. This graph could also more or less show the pattern of carbon accumulation in our forests, a decline followed by a recovery. The important point to make is that forests in both the United States and in New England are right now carbon sinks. They are taking carbon on net, they are taking carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in organic matter. even though we are losing forest to development, the accumulation of biomass in the remaining forest is sufficient to outweigh the loss of the total forest acreage. But that's not going to continue forever. And we are now, since the 1970s, we've actually been in a second wave of forest loss, which is a serious problem. Okay. Let's scroll down to where next one. Okay. Because of this history of clearing, New England's forests currently store a lot less carbon than they could. If you look at the left-hand bar, that shows the average carbon stocking in all of New England's forests. It's about 25 metric tons per acre. And that's about half of the amount that was in the original old growth forests, as best as we can determine from remnant stands. And there's a clear pattern in New England. Most states, 5 of the states, carbon stocking is about 30 to 35 tons per acre. These are the central and southern New England states where most land is owned by small landowners who harvest lightly or if at all. This is compared to Maine, where much of Maine is dominated by large commercial timber companies, formerly paper companies, but now primarily investment organizations. These lands, unlike the smaller private ownerships, these lands are managed primarily for timber production. And it's a consequence, an unfortunate consequence of forest economics, that there is no economically rational reason to grow big old trees. You're simply losing money if you let a spruce tree grow to be 200 years old, and you lose even more if you let it die and fall over and rot. So Maine, in general, because of the dominance of these large commercial ownerships, has much lower carbon stocking. And these are the types of lands, these low carbon lands are the types of lands that AMC has acquired in our Maine Woods initiative. Okay. But despite that, all of New England's forests, again, are still accumulating carbon at a fairly good rate. Slower in Maine, but it's still a carbon sink. Now, the downside, the flip side of that is these large commercial lands in Maine are also the dominant timber supplier in New England. So this argument about what's the best use of our forests for social benefit, for climate change benefit, has been going on for quite a while. It actually, this is an argument that goes back to the earliest 20th century, when the debates between preservation and use between John Muir and Gifford Pinchot that ended up, in sort of the dual agencies of the National Park Service and the National Forest Service. So, we may say we want these lands of northern Maine to store a lot more carbon, but that means they're probably going to end up harvesting less timber, which means that timber supply will come from somewhere else, which has its own negative consequences in terms of increased emissions from bringing wood up from the southeastern United States or other places. It also means if we reduce the amount of wood harvested, it may mean we use more steel and concrete in building as opposed to wood for construction. That has negative consequences. So there's, again, this question of what is the appropriate balance between retaining increasing carbon stored in forests and the sustainable production of an important renewable dew source, and what type of forest management will best achieve this balance? Numbers of studies have been going on about this. So, carbon-friendly forest management. When we think about this, for some reason that seems to be scrolling a little bit weirdly, but in any case. So ecological reserves have a role to play. All things being equal, you'll get your greatest carbon storage by leaving land alone, even if you include the carbon that's stored in wood products. But obviously, if you turn the whole world into an ecological reserve, where's the wood going to come from? So that's a question, balance between reserves and managed lands is a debate. Also, the type of forestry that's practiced is another subject for debate. Basically, you have two models. One might be called the commercial model. I call it production forestry, where the focus is on producing wood fiber in an economically efficient way. That is opposed to what's often called nowadays ecological forestry, where the goal is to maintain the forest as a functioning ecosystem, a more natural ecosystem, while extracting some amount of wood fiber. And it's interesting that just interesting, it may be because of this, the way this is being done, but it seems like this has scrolled past some stuff. But we have, the story map includes sort of two schematics of different types of forestry, you know, sort of a cycle of production forestry, which maintains forests in a relatively simple, young, low carbon condition, never allows for the development of old forests or big trees or lots amount of dead wood, and ecological forestry, which puts an emphasis on maintaining those types of components. And that is the type of forestry that AMC has tried to implement on our Maine Woods initiative, trying to take these heavily harvested industrial lands and restore them to a somewhat more natural condition. Unfortunately, yeah, I will say there's many of you may have read a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold in 1949, from 1949, and in that he makes that distinction. He called it Group A and Group B forestry. Now I refer to it as production versus ecological forestry. So again, these are not new debates. You know, sorry for some reason this is the right hand side is not scrolling the way it's supposed to. But again, there's a nice picture on the left of an old tree. These are the types of things that are generally lost when lands are utilized for a long period of time primarily for producing timber. It has been done in Maine for over a century. These are the types of components that AMC is working to restore on our land. And when we started doing this 20 years ago, we really weren't thinking about climate change or carbon sequestration. The primary focus of doing this type of management was for biodiversity benefits. Generally, ecological forestry will have much greater benefit for forest biodiversity than a production model. Things like big dead logs and big old trees and rotten trees are really critical components for biodiversity for a lot of organisms. Those are again, as I said, those are the things that have been lost. So of these two models of forestry, it turns out that the ecological model, which was originally thought of for its biodiversity benefits, also turns out to have significant climate change benefits in terms of balancing the need for producing wood with maintaining high levels of carbon storage on the ground. The downside is that an ecological model will generally have lower economic return, which is why landowners, the large commercial landowners who are focused primarily on making money off the land, don't adopt it. You let trees grow longer, beyond their sort of financially optimum age. You accept much higher levels of mortality, you build up dead wood stocks. So there is a financial sacrifice involved in practicing ecological forestry. And I like to think of the difference between the money that can be made through a production model versus the money that can be made through an ecological forestry model as the tax you pay to the earth. This is a voluntary tax, and AMC, because of our mission, we are willing to pay a much higher tax to the earth. in order to maintain those non-economic benefits, whether it's carbon sequestration or biodiversity, or just the aesthetic value of an old forest that actually looks like a forest as opposed to a timber plantation. And we are not unique in this. This is the type of forestry that's practiced by most NGO landowners, such as the Nature Conservancy or the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forest, as well as most public agencies, such as the White Mountain National Forest and the Maine Bureau of Parks and Lands. Their focus, because of their missions, is on providing a wide array of public benefits than just making money off the land. This is just an aerial photo, Google Earth image from northern Maine showing the distinction. It's down the middle is a township line. On the left, the land is owned by a large commercial timber company. You can see lots of clear cuts. Pretty much every acre you look at shows evidence of recent harvesting. On the right is Maine Bureau of Parks and Lands property. Much low, you can see evidence of timber harvesting, but at a much lower intensity. And if you zoom in, you can see that, the forests, the darker forests are older forests with larger trees and more stocking. So let's scroll past this and we'll get to AMC's Maine Woods Initiative. So I don't know how many, hopefully many of you have been up there or at least know about this. This project began in the early 2000s as an attempt to mix land conservation with a new backcountry recreational development. Had four main goals, again, backcountry recreation, ecological reserves, responsible forestry, and community partnerships. Since that time, our ownership south of Baxter State Park and east of Moosehead Lake in the 100-mile wilderness region has grown to 114,000 acres, with another 15,000 under contract. We are certified, we are Forest Stewardship Council Green certified in partnership with the Nature Conservancy. And we are trying to use this as a model for a new way to both conserve land, practice forestry, and provide both ecological and social benefits. Now, as I said, all this land was prior heavily harvested commercial land. So while we acquired some areas that looked pretty nice, we acquired a lot more that looked like this: young forest, simple forest, even age forest, and in some cases, pretty heavily degraded forest. But there'd been a lot of high grading where the previous landowners took the good trees and left the garbage. And this is a long-term restoration project to return these lands to a more natural condition through both reserves and active management. So this map on the right basically shows our management zones. The large orange areas are permanent ecological reserves where nature will be allowed to take its course. They occupy about 28% of our land. This doesn't show the Barnard Forest, which is south of our these lands. There's also a number of different protection zones, such as riparian areas, steep slopes, where we don't harvest timber. And the light green is our timber management area, which constitutes about 44% of our timber management. I mean, 54% of our 54% of our ownership. And sometimes people ask, why is AMC in the timber business? Why don't we just leave it all alone? Well, the simple answer is we couldn't afford to do the Maine Woods Initiative without timber, the revenue from timber harvesting. We would have to have a much bigger capital campaign with a much bigger endowment. And we believe that timber management is not something to be avoided. The local production of a renewable resource we think is a societal good, and we're trying to do it in an ecologically sensitive way. We've been harvesting every year since we bought the property on the Katahdin Ironworks. We've been harvesting every year since 2004. The Roach Ponds, which was our most heavily harvested property, we really didn't get started there until about 2017, and we're just getting started on the Pleasant River Headwaters Forest, which we just acquired in 2022. And the Barnard Forest, plans for that property are still under development. So I'm going to scroll past. There's a lot of information about different harvesting techniques and the way we practice this. But a lot of this follows the recently developed principles, for carbon-friendly forestry, which include things like growing trees to bigger sizes, longer rotations, letting some trees live out their full lifespan to turn into big old trees and then turn into big old dead logs. Again, we basically don't harvest any trees over 18 inches in diameter. We try to put a strong emphasis on maintaining wildlife trees and things like that. And the important difference is that even some commercial landowners will maintain, they'll keep big old trees or wildlife trees, but they're not providing for a new supply. Big old trees die and fall over. And if you want to keep them there on your property, you have to let some trees grow. Unfortunately, most of those trees will end up being harvested before they reach an age where they have the highest ecological value. So again, these are the types of things that we're trying to maintain and particularly restore on our property, because in many areas they have been pretty much eliminated by past harvesting. Big old trees, big dead wood have great biodiversity value, but it also turns out that they're really critical carbon reservoirs. Big trees store a disproportionate amount of carbon in the forest. So again, more pictures of timber harvests, more pictures of our landscape. Again, you're going to have to go look at this to get the full flavor. And all right, so the question is, how are we doing? And we have of our timber management area, we had timber inventories from both 2010 and 2020. So we have a 10-year snapshot of how the forest has changed under our management. And it shows that we've been making great progress. Essentially every measure of forest maturity, whether it's the amount of timber on the ground, the number of big trees, have increased noticeably. Even on the Katahdin Ironworks property, which are the left-hand pairs of graphs, where we've been harvesting every year and have been harvesting very close to our calculated allowable cut. We have been moving the forest, even with removing timber, we have been moving the forest towards a condition where it is more diverse, higher volume, higher carbon, more big trees. And that also translates into carbon stocking. We estimate that even in our timber management area, our carbon stocking increased about 17% over 10 years. That's pretty significant increase. Now, our projection for the future is this will continue. If you look at the top graph, which shows growth versus harvest, right now we're cutting about 40% of the growth. The rest is accumulating as wood on the ground. And we expect this to, be following, these models are redone every 10 years, but we expect over the next half century to increase the stocking on our property from about 17 cords an acre, which is sort of the standard forestry measurement in our region, to in excess of 25. And that is the level at which we'd like to maintain it. So we're in a process of transitioning this heavily harvested low carbon forest to a sustainably managed high carbon forest, half a century from now. Now, as I said, this involves paying a very significant tax to the earth. We are leaving a lot of money in the woods in terms of foregone harvest, dead wood, and things like that. So this is a financial sacrifice compared to what the amount of revenue that could be made under a commercial or production model. And as a nonprofit, that is a mission that a sacrifice we are willing to make. But it turns out there is a way to help compensate for that, and that is carbon offset projects. And we have been one of the early leaders, early adopters of entering into forest carbon markets in the region. We completed the second forest carbon offset project in New England back in 2014. So right now, but anyway, if you're not familiar, a carbon offset is essentially an action taken by one party that balances the emissions taken by a second party. And the second party pays the first party for that carbon offset. And carbon offsets take a variety of forms. They either prevent carbon from entering the atmosphere or remove carbon from the atmosphere, as in the case of forest growth. So we actually have 4 carbon projects on our ownership now. 2 of them we initiated ourselves. 2 of them on the Silver Lake property and the New Barnard property came with the property. So we essentially inherited a carbon project that was already under development. And the sale of the offsets from these carbon projects has provided an important secondary source of revenue that helps subsidize the lower intensity management that we're doing. Carbon offset projects can be particularly important on ecological reserves, which otherwise would generate no income and have to be subsidized by timber revenue from our other lands. So carbon offsets provide a strong basis of financial support for the establishment of ecological reserves. And there's more information on this. We actually have you go to the knowledge base on AMC's website, we have a whole frequently asked questions about carbon offsets and AMC's carbon projects, if you want to learn about that. Now, in addition to the revenue they provide, these offsets are benefiting AMC in additional ways. So now we get to the net zero initiative, which is AMC, and I think I have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to wrap up here. But this is AMC's commitment to reduce our own carbon footprint. Essentially, what we do is try to, through energy efficiency and the use of renewable energy, reduce the amount of carbon that we are putting into the atmosphere as an organization. But you can't eliminate it completely. So in some cases, that needs to be balanced by offsets. And we are in the fortunate position of generating our own offsets. So we are retaining some of our carbon offset credits from one of our projects. Rather than selling them, we will use them ourselves. We will retire them to balance our own emissions. Again, if you want to learn more, I would suggest go to AMC's website and find our net zero strategic plan, which we adopted last year, which lays out in detail the strategies for how we're going to achieve this. We have calculated AMC's emissions profile in the past, and they're developing a system for monitoring it going forward. In case it talks about all the different sources of AMC's emissions, by far the biggest source of AMC's emissions is heating the Highlands Center. And we're starting, we've just last year installed a large new solar array at the Highlands Center, and we're going to continue that. So we're using our offsets to internally to balance our own emissions, but we have also taken we are also taking the proceeds, future proceeds from the sale of carbon credits from our projects are being put into a newly established climate and conservation fund, which will be an internal fund, which will have two primary purposes: to fund both previous land, additional land acquisition to help pay for additional land conservation in the Maine Woods region, but also to help fund energy efficiency projects at AMC facilities. So, and this is my last paragraph. And we're going to read, our story comes full circle. Carbon stored in a Maine forest will help reduce the impact of carbon emissions from AMC facilities in New York and New Jersey, such as the Baker Camp, which we are now developing. Conserving 100,000 acres of Maine forest, managing it conservatively to increase its carbon storage may be the best thing that AMC has done for the climate, and it will continue to pay dividends for decades to come. There's more on the story map. Again, there's an interactive map, which I'm not going to get into, of AMC's Maine Woods, where you can look at the pattern of our management zones and our timber harvests over a background of aerial photos from two different times. So you can see how the forest has changed under our ownership. And there's also a long list of additional resources if you really want to dive into this into greater detail. So 2 minutes over, I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Allie to handle the Q&A.
Thanks, Dave. That was a wealth of knowledge, and you have so much knowledge, and we appreciate you coming back and sharing this with everybody. And thank you, Cathy, for highlighting what StoryMaps are and the ones that AMC created. Thanks to you and the team. So with that, we've had some questions coming in during the presentation. Please feel free to send in more questions. You should see the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. And if we don't get to answer those live, we will follow up with you as well. So my first question is for Cathy. And Cathy, we'd love to know, are there any new story maps in the works?
Thanks. Yeah, actually, there are two that I know of. One is actually with the Narragansett chapter they're working on a story map, and hopefully it will be finished sometime this year. And I'm actually working with a partner in the Mid-Atlantic, a recreation committee, and supporting them with a story map as well.
That's awesome. Thank you. And I've got a question for Dave. Do the ecological forests have any economic return at all?
Well, sure. Again, the ecological reserves, the primary revenue coming from those is through the carbon projects and the sale of carbon offsets. Other than that, no. Other than that, they totally have to be subsidized. Yep. Some of that has been subsidized. They are at least one of our ecological reserves was established through the sale of a conservation easement to the state of Maine. So the revenue from that helped pay for the land and help somewhat reflect the fact that there wouldn't be revenue. So that's a one-time thing. But the carbon projects are the only source of revenue for the ecological reserves going forward. Mm-hmm. The timber management areas, yes, we get revenue from both timber sales and from carbon credits.
Great, thank you. And a follow-up to that, are the ecological reserves on the Roach Tract eligible for a carbon offset sale?
Not anymore. When we established the reserves on the Roach Tract were established through a conservation easement held by the Nature Conservancy, and we put that easement in place in, I think, 2010 or 2011. And at the time, we considered doing a carbon project on those reserves. Essentially, if you establish a forever wild area, you have a year to start a carbon project on that. Otherwise, there's, I didn't get into the criteria for a carbon project, but there's something called additionality, which is the carbon project has to be above and beyond what would happen anyways. Well, if you have a forever wild easement on an area, that's going to happen anyway. There's nothing you can do beyond that to increase carbon storage. So once we put that easement on the Roach Ponds reserves, we had a year to start a carbon project. But the stocking of those areas was so low that at the time, we didn't think it was financially feasible to actually do a project. It would take too long for it to pay back through future growth. These projects are quite expensive to establish. And usually you pay back those costs out of the initial revenues. This would take a long time to pay back. And the window for doing a project on those reserves is now passed.
Great, thank you for sharing. I've got another question for Cathy. Cathy, I'd love to know, or the audience would love to know, how is it decided when story maps should be created, or how are the regions or projects chosen?
Oh, that's a great question. So a lot of it deals, I hate to say it, with funding. So, or like expanding access to the outdoor. We did receive funding for that, but it was also something that the AMC is very passionate about accessing the outdoors, especially for those communities that are environmental justice communities. So yeah, I think a lot of it deals with the topic and also funding.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. You know, when Cathy first started working on some of these other story maps, you know, we started to see the potential, and it just came to me that this was really a perfect way to tell our MWI story. It's less dense than just writing a long magazine article. And, you know, we've told this story, you know, we have bunches of recorded webinars with PowerPoint presentations to tell this story. But, you know, there's something about just listening to a recording of a presentation that doesn't work. This works much better. So, you know, that's how I said, I want to do a story map on this because it's a great way to tell our story. So,
Yeah,
and we did get some external funding to help, you know, cover the Cathy's time and stuff in developing. So I suspect it, so, and I suspect part of it, you know, is as the communications department gets better understanding of the potential of these, that, you know, they'll probably come with ideas of, you know, can we use this to tell this story or that story? So
it provides a great opportunity for that self-guided learning and exploration. And then also the opportunity, Cathy, you had mentioned how the Merrimack Dragonfly Mercury project, StoryMap, it's in 3 additional languages outside of English. And so it makes it more accessible to communities and folks to learn and engage with the outdoors, which is really fantastic. So Dave, could you elaborate on dead wood? Does dead wood continue to store carbon? And if it does, for how long? Or is it more about what it provides to the environment?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, the value of dead wood for biodiversity has been known for a long time. I had a great quote in my office where E.O. Wilson was out with a reporter and he was pulling apart like a dead stump. And he's looking at, you know, the insects and you know, the mosses and the fungi and, you know, and all those things that are growing on this decaying wood. And he called them, you know, these are the organisms that hold the world steady. They are, you know, the things that carry out the wood decay and soil building. They're also critically important for carrying those organisms through a disturbance. You know, maintaining some amount of dead wood in a heavy harvest is really important, as it provides, you know, an opportunity for those organisms to be present in the regrowing forest. Like in the story map, I use the term biodiversity lifeboat, you know, that carries these organisms through a heavy disturbance until a new forest can be reestablished. But they're also important carbon reservoirs. You know, they don't last forever. They do decay slowly. You know, a 10-inch hardwood log may disappear in 20 or 25 years. A 2 or 3 foot diameter spruce log will probably be there for a century or more. And it's, it is slowly releasing carbon back into the atmosphere, which is why it's important to keep replenishing that pool. The important thing is not the fate of any particular log, but maintaining a pool of this material that is constantly being replenished and is constantly storing large amounts of carbon, even though, there's new carbon coming in and there's old carbon going out, but the total amount, large amount, is staying.
Yep, that's great. Thank you for sharing. I've got one more question for Cathy. Cathy, can you share where we can find the story maps? Are they on the AMC website?
Well, Dave's is. So some of them, like the Pennsylvania Conservation Atlas Story Map, is on the pahighlands.org, and some of the other ones. But right now we're working with our web department, and we're actually going to try to develop, they're in the process of developing a web page just to highlight these story maps. Plus we have interactive maps and dashboards, so it'll be a one-stop to look at everything that we have developed across the AMC region.
Thank you. And again, we'll share the links to the story maps that Cathy mentioned today, as well as the forestry story map that Dave highlighted. I've got one more question in the queue, and this one is for Dave. So Dave, could you speak more to how AMC could best go about measuring its progress towards meeting its net zero goals across all the facilities and protected lands?
Well, like I say, we have we calculated our carbon footprint. There was a fellow, basically Mark Woodward, who was the facilities manager at Joy Street, did that from about 2003 to 2014. And essentially what our carbon footprint includes is all the fuels that we burn on site, whether for heating buildings, hot water, cooking, vehicles, as well as the carbon emissions from the electricity we purchase. That's the basic core of our carbon footprint. And then when Mark retired, that kind of fell into hiatus. We had a research fellow for 2 years, Arcadia Lee, who developed our net zero strategic plan. And she worked with the finance department, and calculated our carbon footprint for 2019. That's the last year for which we have good data. We're currently working, I think, the finance department, I think, is currently working to get the numbers for 2022. The strategic plan, the goal is to publicly report this every year, just as, in an annual report, just as we report our financial situation, we want to report our carbon situation. So we don't quite have the system set up yet to do this on a regular annual basis. We are in the process of hiring a director of state sustainability, and that will probably be one of their priorities to get this system set up. So yeah, it is our goal, so that we can say, yeah, last year, our carbon footprint went down X amount, and we need to use so many offsets to balance that. So we're heading there. We haven't quite got there yet, but hopefully in the next year or so, it will be set up as something to do regularly.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Well, I want to be conscious of time, and I appreciate you, Dave, keeping track of the days of the week to join us for our webinar today. And thank you, Cathy, for logging on. If we didn't get to answer your question today, we'll follow up with you via email and make sure that we get you those answers. And if anything comes to mind after kind of sitting on this and thinking through the information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, Dave and Cathy, for joining us to share about the impact of StoryMaps and how this tool helps organizations like AMC share information with the public. I also want to thank all of you, our audience, for joining us today and learning more about AMC. We have a variety of folks on this webinar, and we're grateful for all of you for tuning in. Attendees include AMC members, President Society supporters, and Summit Trust members. And I want to thank you all for supporting AMC in the outdoors. We wouldn't be able to accomplish this work without you. If this webinar did pique your interest and you'd like to learn more about AMC's mission to foster the protection, enjoyment, and understanding of the outdoors, we invite you to join us, perhaps as a President Society or Summit Trust member, or maybe we'll see you on a volunteer chapter-led trip, or perhaps in a guided outdoors program. Please do reach out. And if you're interested in learning more about StoryMaps, AMC's work in the Maine woods, or any other initiatives we have going on, you see the email here for the AMC Conservation Team. And if you're interested in learning more about the President's Society or joining, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to connect with you and get in touch. So with that, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their Thursday and perhaps gets outdoors before the storm comes on Saturday, depending on where you are. Maybe you'll have rain or snow. I hope you all have a wonderful day.